everyone. This is Jessica González-Rojas, candidate for New York State Assembly in the 34th Assembly District. And I'm super excited to welcome you all to our second in a series of webinars related to the coronavirus. And tonight we'll be talking about teaching and learning at home with guest Leontine Greenberg. So just to introduce myself, I'm running for New York State Assembly in the districts 34, which includes the communities of Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, and Woodside. And as a candidate, two issues that are a top priority for me is both education and healthcare. And this is certainly an issue where both education and healthcare overlap quite a bit. We're facing a public health pandemic that has impacted all areas of our lives, including our education system. So for many of us as parents, we learned last week that the schools were closed, we're going to close, and that as of tomorrow, we will be moving on to online learning for our children. So as a parent of a third grader in the public school system right here in Jackson Heights, I know what it feels like to be very unprepared for next week and the weeks ahead. So I'm so grateful to have Leontine join us and share her experience as someone who has homeschooled her child for many years. While we won't get into specifics about the Department of Education requirements and what each school is requiring, we are excited that she'll share tips and best practices for both parents and caregivers to feel best prepared for what's ahead. So we're shifting our regularly scheduled campaigns events to do these virtual webinars. We would have done town halls on different topics, but right now we're going to do virtual town halls. So we're really thrilled that you were all able to join us. And specifically, we're going to talk about issues related to coronavirus. In fact, last week we held a webinar about the virus itself with Jackson Heights resident, parent, and epidemiologist, Dr. John Epstein. If you missed it and it was incredibly informative, we do have a recording available on our website at votejgr.com. So I'm thrilled that tonight we'll have Leontine join us. And just a little bit about Leontine. She is a Jackson Heights resident. She's a neighbor. She's an educator, an artist, and a community organizer. She has a BFA in illustration and an MSEd in special education from Hunter College, where she focused on the cognitive benefits of free play and time in nature for neuro-diverse children. She has been homeschooling her daughter for 5 years, from 4th grade to 8th grade, and she'll be joined by Aurora DeLuca, who homeschools her 7-year-old and 11-year-old and can give some perspective on educating younger children at home. So Leontine, we're so thrilled you're able to join us.
Stress, short-term stress, like even just being in a fight with someone or being almost in a car accident, anything that triggers a fight or flight reflex interferes with learning. And you can see it in the brain. The hormonal reaction that's triggered by stress shuts down some of the memory circuits and makes it impossible to synthesize multiple things into a single memory and store it properly. Your brain is designed, if it's running from a bear, to just only remember that there was a bear there. Like, it's not, you can't do complex thinking in a state of anxiety. And if you're anxious, your kids are anxious, even if they don't seem anxious. Kids are very tuned into what's going on with their parents. And you don't always see it, but just assume that your kids are in a state of extreme anxiety right now. And when kids are extremely anxious, often they act out. Like, you'll see more tantrums and more refusing to comply, which is going to make you more stressed, which is going to make them more stressed, which is going to make them act out more. And it can be a terrible cycle for families. So my advice is to put the mask on yourself first. Like, do whatever you need to do to get a place where you feel calm and centered and ready to work with your kid, because that's going to help them feel calm and centered. And if you're not there, it doesn't matter what else you do, they're not going to be able to learn. So don't feel like if you need to go in your room and shut the door and scream into a pillow, that's not selfish. That's not something you're just doing for you. That's what you need to do to then be able to help your children. So, like I said, children don't express anxiety in ways that are necessarily obvious, often because they don't have the words to talk about their emotions. They'll focus on the physical aspects of anxiety. So they'll talk about having a stomach ache, feeling sick to their stomach, having a headache, often like right when you're saying please sit down and do a math worksheet, they'll say, I have a stomach ache and I feel like I'm going to die. And then you'll be extremely frustrated because you just want them to do the math worksheet, but hear that as anxiety. And I know that it's confusing because we're all so tuned in right now to every physical feeling that we're having and whether it means that we have coronavirus. But so keep an eye on that, but also keep an eye on whether it's actually an expression of anxiety. Another thing that you'll see is refusing to participate in activities, like even things that seem very obviously fun. So like my neighbor's son, they wanted to go for a hike and he wouldn't go for a hike because he was afraid that there might be bears. And then the next day he wouldn't eat a blueberry because that seemed new and weird. And that's annoying in the moment, but it's also an expression of like underlying anxiety and fear. So try not to get too frustrated with it. OCD can often come out of anxiety. And again, like we're all washing our hands like crazy and trying not to touch things and things that can very easily shade into OCD behaviors. So like keep an eye on if your kids are washing their hands the right amount at the appropriate times, or if they're washing their hands 20 times a day when they don't need to. Kids get really clingy when they're anxious. They have more tantrums and meltdowns, and they'll engage in more oppositional behavior and just refusal to do what they're supposed to do. And that's fun. That's going to make you feel like you need to call the exorcist, probably. But if when your child is behaving in a way that's driving you crazy, if you can see it as anxiety and respond to it as you would respond to anxiety, you will probably have a better experience than if you turn to discipline and try to stop the behavior that way. So ways to manage anxiety, not in the moment, but more in the long term, is to think about having very stable routines and schedules. And so by schedules, I mean thinking like we're going to do this at 7:30 a.m., this at 9 a.m., this at 2 p.m. And that can be like, especially for kids who are on the spectrum, often that's very important because they can be very tuned into what's going to happen at 2 o'clock. And if that thing doesn't happen at 2 o'clock, it's destabilizing and upsetting. But for a lot of families, trying to live that way can just cause conflict and frustration. Like you shouldn't be beating yourself up because you said on the schedule you'd do a thing at 12:30 and now it's 12:45 and you didn't do it. For most kids, what's more important is to have a routine and to know what's coming next. So it doesn't matter what time you wake up and what time you have breakfast. It matters that you wake up, then you have breakfast, then you sit at your desk and do work, then you exercise, just that it happens in the same order, that nothing is too surprising. Also just giving them a sense of normalcy, which in a very not normal time is really challenging, but I think it's one of the best reasons to stay connected with their schools, stay connected with their teacher. I'm hoping that the DOE can provide some video conferencing like this so that students can interact with their teachers and classmates, because that will make things feel more normal. Sleep is important. It's easy to get on a weird schedule, and we've really struggled with that as homeschoolers. Like my daughter tends to stay up late, and so we can really get off a normal sleep schedule quickly, and it leads to a lot of problems, like mental health problems and getting things done problems. Modeling for yourself, like how to express emotions healthily and be comfortable with them, be able to say like, I'm really anxious, I need to go into my room and scream in a pillow now. Like when your kids see you doing that, that tells them how to deal with their anxiety. And then the last two things I got from a video that I have the link to on the side. Lynn Lyons is a therapist who does videos on Facebook, and she was talking about managing anxiety in this time, and that one thing that can help is engaging your kids in creative problem solving. So if you have a problem, asking them for suggestions and working together. Like if you don't have a space for them to do their schoolwork, talking to them about what they think would be a good space and how they can help you set it up gives them a sense of control over the situation, makes them feel like part of your family as a community, and that can really help them. And then also she talked about doing meaningful work. So things that are really helping people. So not sort of like fake busy work things, but like if you genuinely need help sorting the laundry, like even a toddler can help sort the laundry and like put the white things in the white pile and the colored things in the colored pile. And that's something that is genuinely helpful to you and will make them, again, feel like they have a sense of efficacy and that they're helping. My daughter, like with some of her friends, planned a Dungeons and Dragons game for like 6 kids that they're leading. And I think that that really helped them feel like they were helping their community and feel good about themselves. So that worked really well for them. So intentionality in planning how to school your child. When I first started homeschooling, I had a lot of ideas about homeschooling, and I had some negative feelings about the public school system. And so I sort of jumped into it without a ton of plan. Like, I thought I had a lot of planning at the time, but I now realize I didn't. And also that I didn't think about some of the things I should have thought about. So having a real sense of why you're doing something helps you make smart choices while you're doing it. And like, obviously teaching our kids at home right now has been taken out of our hands. We're doing it because we have to, but still within that, every family is going to have their own reasons for not just letting their kids watch TV and eat cookies. There was an article in the New York Times by a mom who was very proud of herself for her, bohemian ways and how she was just going to let her kids watch TV and eat cookies. And it was a very charming article, but also I think it's a big mistake. I think there are really solid reasons to keep your kids on a routine and teach them. So not all these reasons are going to apply to you, but some of them might. And if you have other reasons, just try to be aware of what they are so that you can, when you're trying to make a decision, you can think about those reasons and it'll help inform that. So like, a huge reason for me, like I said before, is just to give a sense of stability and normalcy. Like, what is normal for our kids is to go to school and learn. So as much as you can keep doing that, they're going to feel like the world is still the place that they know and familiar to them. A lot of parents are concerned about losing ground academically. And I think for some kids, that's probably not an issue so much, but especially for kids with learning disabilities, they can lose ground really quickly. It's an excellent reason to like stay on top of the schoolwork. Some people I know really want to take advantage of this time to do things with their kids that they can't do when they're in school and teach them life skills and read to them. And that's all learning too, even if it's not the specific plan that the DOE gave you. A big reason is to stay busy. Like, you can't watch TV and eat candy for 6 weeks. Like, you have to do other stuff. And then in New York, because we have such an education culture of scarcity and competition, like, I think everyone's terrified that they're not going to be able to meet the requirements of the DOE so that their kids can go to middle school and go to high school and have a productive life. I do know that the DOE said they wouldn't count attendance for this time towards middle school and high school admissions, but I'm not sure, like, when they say they're taking attendance, I don't know what they're doing with that information. It's still a little mysterious. So, like, after this webinar, or whenever you have a chance to sit down, like, think about why you're doing this and think about what your goals are for this time, even if it's just to get through it without going insane, and also what your personal and family values are that you bring to this time. So once you know for yourself, and while you're thinking through for yourself what your goals are and what your values are, like, for some people, your values might be, like, I have a lot of respect for the school system and I want my kid to be part of that community. So, like, I really want to stick with what the DOE is doing and have that continuity. For other families, they might think this is an amazing opportunity. Like, I'm not crazy about what the DOE does. I want to do something different. And that's also a completely valid value. You should just, if you know what yours are, it's going to help you think through everything else. So, like, when I'm trying to figure out stuff like that, I find just writing it down, like writing in a journal, is super helpful. I think it's really important to be on the same page as whoever you're co-parenting with, just to avoid conflict and because you'll feel closer and you'll make decisions together. And then communicate those things to your children, because if they know the basis for your decisions, they'll be more likely to comply with them. So one of the big choices I think everyone is going to have to make is how much to try to recreate a school environment. Like, if you have multiple kids, do you want to have them sitting around a table like as they would at school? Do you want to stick to the structure of the school day? Do you want to try and spend the same amount of time on a lesson that they would spend at school? Any of those are valid. I think it's important, though, to pick and choose them mindfully, so that, like, when I started homeschooling, I did a lot of things just because I went to school, my kid had been in school, I taught in a school, that was the only way I knew how to educate someone. And then over the years of doing it, I realized a lot of the things that happen in a school are happening because they have to educate 30 children, and they're not necessarily relevant to educating 1 or 3 or even 5 children. You can do things very differently if you want to. I would ask your child what their school routines are, because that'll help you know what's important to them, and what you can ask them what they would like to continue. One thing I think, one of the biggest benefits of going to school is that kids learn so much from their peers. Like, kids will learn way more in a classroom with other kids, or in a home with other kids, anywhere with other kids, because they talk to each other, they teach each other, they model things for each other. And I'm hoping that through like video software like this or FaceTime, that kids will still be able to connect with their classmates as much as possible. Like, even if you just have FaceTime on your phone in the corner of the table while they're working, and their friend is doing the same thing and they can see each other, I think like that gives them a sense of continuity that could be really helpful. And I think it's really important to maintain their relationships with their teachers. Even if we stay out of school through the end of the year and they're never in that teacher's class again, that person is a very important person who's been in their life. And for children, a sudden interruption of a relationship with an adult can be really traumatic. And so making sure they know that that adult is still there, still cares about them, is still communicating with them, like, that's huge for kids. Even if they're like, I hate my teacher, they don't. Like, that person's important to them. And then a big part for me of what was different about homeschooling in school was that I thought you had to have a 7-hour day. I thought that that was how long it took to learn those subjects. But so much of that 7-hour day is getting all the kids to sit down, getting the kids from one class to another, getting one kid to stop sticking a pencil up the other kid's nose, getting supplies out, putting supplies away. And like, what I've heard from most homeschoolers is that they spend maybe 4 hours, like an average of 4 hours a day teaching, and they're doing it in much smaller chunks. So I know a lot of the schedules that DOE have sent out basically follow a school schedule where every subject is 50 minutes. And that seems way too long for me. Like, I think if you're one-on-one teaching your kid, it's probably about 20 minutes. And then they're going to be burnt out, you're going to be burned out, and you should take a break. So as far as managing that time, if you decide not to follow the school schedule, again, think about if you want to be on a schedule or if you just want to have routines where they know what's going to happen every day. Think about how much time it really takes them to complete a task, and give them that much time. Don't feel like they have to keep working for 45 minutes on math if they've already done the lesson. It's super important to take breaks. The only reason they don't take breaks in school is because they're so short on time because of all the other stuff they have to do. But in developmental psychology, one thing that people have learned is that learning doesn't actually happen in the brain during a lesson. You're taking in the information during the lesson, and then when you go and do something else, your brain is in the background synthesizing that information and putting it together and storing it in your memory. So you'll actually learn much more effectively if you do a 20-minute lesson and then take 20 minutes and do something else, or even 10 minutes and do something else. And the best possible thing to do in that 10 minutes is some kind of physical exercise. So like, in the best possible world, you do a lesson for 10 or 20 minutes, and then or 20 or 30 minutes, and then you'd spend 10 or 20 minutes doing yoga, doing jumping jacks, hula hooping, whatever physical activity your kids enjoy, because that's amazing for their brain. Like, it brings oxygen to the brain, it brings blood to the brain, which brings oxygen to the brain. It really improves learning in every way. All of this, if you're a working parent, you might be thinking, I have no idea how I'm going to do any of that. Like, even 4 hours a day seems completely unmanageable. And you're correct, it's not a realistic expectation. And like, the best advice I would give is to have a serious talk with your employer if you feel like you comfortably can, and ask them what their expectations are, and then have a serious talk with the school and ask them what their expectations are, and see where you can compromise. But if you really have to work from like 9 to 5 and there's no flexibility, consider just teaching your kid in the time that you would be helping them with homework. And if you can do 2 hours a day, honestly, like, your kid is probably getting almost no one-on-one attention in school. It's impossible in a class of 28 children. So even if you spend a couple hours with them, that's much more than they're getting in school, and you should feel good about it. And then and I wanted to talk about screen time, because a lot of people asked about that. And I think, so especially if you are working and you need your kids to amuse themselves while you're working, I don't think we should think of screen time as just one monolithic block of activities that is bad. I think we should think about what is happening on the screen, and if kids are watching a super interesting documentary or a movie that's narratively complex and has something to offer, or if they're communicating with friends, like I don't think we should say no to any screen time that involves communicating with friends, because I think it's so important in this time to maintain those social connections. So don't feel like you're a bad parent if your kid is on the computer for 5 hours. Just make sure they're using that time in a way that aligns with your goals and values. One like truism of homeschooling is that it's really important to have a dedicated workspace, so your kid knows when they go and they sit down in that place, it is school time and they need to work. And that advice is definitely created by people who did not live in tiny New York City apartments, because we have set up so many dedicated workspaces in our home, and within 24 hours, someone comes and dumps a bunch of stuff on that dedicated workspace and it's gone. So we do most of our learning on the couch and it's fine. But like if you have the space for it and you can make it happen, I think it does help. I think your kids would enjoy setting it up and having some control over what it's like. One thing to think about is, like, often people think that to concentrate and work, you have to have no distractions. Like the perfect workspace would just be a closet with nothing in it but you and your work. But it's actually better to have like a window, some plants, some pictures, because like a lot of work time is just kind of thinking, and having something to look at while you're thinking actually does help you think better. Easy to access supplies were huge for us. I used to not want my daughter to take out the supplies because I thought she would lose them and ruin them. But having your kid have to ask you every time they need scissors will drive you out of your mind. So put them all in a place where they can find them. And then when they say, I need scissors, say, go get the scissors. And hopefully they will. And then managing paperwork, especially if your kids have worksheets that they're doing, it can be a nightmare. Like they pile up so fast, you will not believe how much paper like a school can produce. So I have a filing system. I have 2 folders for each subject. So I have like math work to do and math work that we've done, ELA to do, ELA that we've done. And so that way Nina knows that she can go and get her next math worksheet from a folder. And then when she's done with it, she can put it in the other folder. And then when the done folders get too full, I just put a rubber band around them and throw them in a drawer, because once I've looked at them, I don't really need to be able to easily access them again. Motivation is the million-dollar question. Most research on education is about how to motivate students. And that's because most of the things that we want to teach kids to do aren't natural human behaviors. And so they're very reluctant to do them. Their brains aren't designed to do them. And it's difficult. So first of all, don't beat yourself up if you have trouble getting your kid to do academic work. Like the greatest minds in education theory have not fully answered this question. One thing to think about is like another thing to be intentional about is what rules you make and whether there's a really good reason for those rules. And if there is, tell your kid what it is. And that reason can be because if you sit in that chair, I will lose my mind. Like that's a valid reason. It could just be because something annoys you. You don't want them to do it, but tell them that. And you might also find thinking about rules that way that some of the rules we assume we have to have for kids aren't actually that necessary, and you can let them go and everyone will be fine. Most people, when they think about motivation, they think about rewards and punishment. And especially like if you watch any of those shows where a British nanny comes to your house and tells you how to make your children be good, they always have a sticker chart, and you train your kid like a dog. Like they sort of do the thing you want them to do and they get a sticker, and then they do a better job and they get a sticker, and then at the end maybe they get some M&Ms, and like that works. Like it works with dogs too, but it only teaches them to do the thing to get the reward. So in the long term, it's not very effective, because if you did that for your kid's whole school career, then they went to college, no one was giving them rewards, they wouldn't be very motivated to do their work. However, this is a special time and I don't want anyone to go crazy. And if giving your kid M&Ms when they do their worksheets makes things work for you, you should do that. Because in the long term, whatever happens over the next 2 or 3 months is not going to ruin your kid's brain. But I would say avoid punishment. Even just yelling at your kids is punishment. Like you're trying to create an aversive experience so they don't do the thing again. It doesn't work. It just breeds resentment. Like anyone who's trained animals knows it doesn't work to train animals. It definitely doesn't work to train children. So I would a lot of times send Nina to her room because I just needed a break, but I was framing it as punishment. Like you were bad, so you have to go to your room. And things got a lot easier between us when I realized I could just say, you need to go to your room because if you don't, I'm going to lose my temper. Like it's about me, it's about my feelings, but it's still important that you do it. Coaxing kids, just like begging them to do it and telling them why they should do it and pleading with them to do it. Like it usually doesn't work because the more you plead with the kid to do something, the more you're demonstrating that that's a thing they probably don't want to do. So you can just end up really butting heads because the more you're like, you should really do this, the more they're like, well, it must be terrible or you wouldn't be coaxing me so hard. The things that I've found work, although nothing works all the time, and sometimes you just have to give them M&Ms, but things to try and see if they work for you and your kid are giving them as much autonomy as possible. So even if they have to do 2 worksheets, but giving them the choice of which one they do first, letting them choose what they're going to do as a break between those 2 things. Like the more control they have over the situation, the more likely they are to do it. One reason it's hard to teach kids is because so much of what we teach them seems very irrelevant to their lives now. Like, especially with math, everyone says, when am I ever going to use this in my life? And most people probably won't, but we still need to learn it. Homeschooling does give an opportunity to create situations where it's relevant. So like if you're shopping for groceries online, you can talk about adding up the prices and how those prices relate to your family budget. Even if that's not relevant to the math they're supposed to be learning in school, it's still a good way to get them interested in math and see that math is real. Same thing with writing, like maybe you can write letters to your older family members who are stuck at home. Like anything you can find where they can see why that skill is useful to them is really helpful. The thing that was most surprising to me as an elementary school teacher was that a lot of times kids aren't doing things because they weren't listening and they're confused. And like, if like I'd be in a room full of kids who weren't sitting in their chairs and I'd be like yelling at them because they weren't sitting in their chairs. And then I'd be like, I need you all to sit on your chairs with your butts on the seat and your feet on the floor and your hands on the table. And then I need you to stay there. And they would do it because they just needed someone to tell them specifically what was expected of them. And like a lot of times we assume that they'll know that what you're supposed to do is sit in a chair and do your worksheet, but they're kids, they don't always know. And sometimes you just have to tell them maybe multiple times, but clearly, and that's what you want them to do. And then like praise over time is very effective. Like if every time they sit down at their desk and do their work, you tell them how awesome they are, how much they're helping their family, how proud you are of them. Like it may not help that day, but over the weeks you will see that it does improve things. It can be really hard, like when you're going out of your mind because your child is being difficult. It can be hard to praise the little thing that they're doing right, but it really does help if you can stick with it. My final thought that I want to leave you with is that it is okay to be bored. I think because we are so infrequently bored in our society because we have phones and televisions and so much going on, like we just never have to be bored. But like our kids are going to be stuck at home and they're going to be bored. And one of the most useful things that anyone ever told me was my advisor in grad school said that most of the time when someone says I'm bored, what they actually mean is that they need attention. And if your kid comes up and says, I'm bored, and you hear that as, I need you to pay attention to me, and you like have a little chat with them, ask them how they're doing, play a quick game with them, go help them make a snack, often they will just go away and amuse themselves after that because what they really wanted was to connect with you. But also, sometimes they're genuinely going to be bored, and something to just tell yourself and tell them is that for most of history, people were bored a lot. It's really good for you. Your brain needs to wander to function properly. It needs to wander to have creative ideas. There are a ton of studies. I looked some of them up when I was taking this slideshow, and there's a ton of evidence that boredom really helps creativity, that when you're sitting around feeling bored, even if you're not enjoying it, your brain is working in the background and coming up with cool, interesting ideas because your brain doesn't want to be bored. And there were some studies that seemed they had like smaller sample sizes, and I wasn't that convinced by them, but that showed that people who were bored demonstrated more pro-social behavior, that they reached out more positively to other people. There's a lot of evidence that it's good for your mental health because that's your brain was designed to spend a lot of time not doing very much. And as a last resort, if your kids keep complaining that they're bored, tell them to go do the dishes if they are so bored. And they will either do the dishes or they will stop being bored. Lastly, someone said that I should have a joke in my presentation. So this is my joke. This is what my house looks like. It's not a joke. It's real. It's very true. This is what my house looks like. All the parts of it that you can't see behind me right now. There are feral raccoons, everything. So that's what I have to tell you. And now I really want to hear what other people are thinking and what questions and concerns they have, and also what people have heard from their children's schools. And I'm going to ask Aurora to also respond to the questions because she'll have a different perspective since she has multiple kids and they're younger and she works.
Thank you, Leontine. Thank you so much. I took like a whole page of notes. So
oh, good. I'm glad. I hope I wasn't too fast, but I wanted to make sure we had time to chat with people too.
Yeah, this is perfect. We have about 19 minutes for questions. So just to remind folks, if you scroll to the bottom of the Zoom page, there's a button that says chat. So you could either type in your question, or if you click on participants, you can go to the bottom right-hand corner and raise your hand. I'm just gonna pose the first question and then we'll build a queue. So Leontine, can you share just your thoughts on how to even talk to your kids about like what's about to happen as of tomorrow? Like, how do you just sort of mentally prepare? And my son kind of understands like he's gonna be doing something different, but we haven't really explained what's gonna happen. I don't know if there's any kind of tips as terms of how to prepare them mentally for this shift.
I think it's partly because the DOE hasn't given people a lot of information about what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Like with the older kids, I would just be honest about that and say, I'm not sure either. We're going to figure it out for ourselves. And it might depend on sort of how much anxiety you think your kids have, because that could be destabilizing to them to hear that you don't know. But I think most people are logging on at 8:30 or 9 and they're going to find out. So maybe just say like, we're going to talk to your teacher on the internet tomorrow morning and they're going to start school again and we're going to find out how. Like they're going to tell us then. Like I don't think you can say more than that, because if you tell them something and it's not true, that's just going to be confusing. But I think they'll be relieved to hear that they're getting back to school. So I think even if they're like, oh, on some level it's going to be good news.
Yeah. Thank you. We have a question from Desiree. So Mia, if you could unmute Desiree. And Desiree, you're welcome to turn on your camera if you want.
Hi, Desiree.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So I know that one of the things that have been really important for our kids, we've been out of school since last week and here in North Carolina. And my kids have always been very into video games, not playing one-on-one, but with other children, from whether it's here all the way through to their cousins in Washington. And it's been important for them because it creates a sense of community. They've been able to create things and accomplish goals together. And I know during this whole time, it's been really important since they haven't been able to talk with your kids. Now, my kids, though, are 13 and 16. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that. I know it's been very important for them to be able to communicate with their friends.
So I'm happy to say I read a whole book on this subject. It was very focused on violent video games because it was written at the time there was a lot of panic about Grand Theft Auto specifically, but they looked at a lot of research around video games, specifically violent ones, but in general, and they found that kids who used them in a pro-social way, like what you're talking about, that generally correlated with kids who generally were good citizens, had a lot of friends, connected well with people, and that like video games were only a problem if kids were playing them alone and using them to avoid other like
Mhm.
activities, and also the kids who already had a lot of problems were using them as escapism, and that wasn't great. But like the way you're talking about, I think especially now, it's really important to connect with people. For younger kids, I know you can do it with Minecraft and
Yes.
with Roblox too.
Mhm.
So yeah, like I honestly would recommend it. I think kids like it and it helps them connect. So does that answer your question, or did you want more?
Yes. No.
Okay.
I'd
Yes.
like to add a little bit to that. First of all, I'm in North Carolina too, so hey.
Good.
but yeah, mine has been on Minecraft every evening with his friends. It's been really important for him. He's on the spectrum. It's a really great way for him to communicate with people. I highly recommend it. It's very social, and it's giving him a kind of a lifeline to the people that he would be seeing in his co-op, or, you know, on the weekends that he's just not seeing now. I think it's so important for them to be doing that. My daughter, who's 7, has started using the Facebook Kids app, the Messenger Kids app, and the Messenger Kids app is great. It's a lot of video games, but it's all, again, like little social video games that they're playing together. And so even at those ages, I think it's really useful just to keep that connection going.
Aurora,
Well, one of the things I want to point out too is I know a lot of parents don't like it. They because they feel like they can't control it, and there's a lot of parent control. My kids cannot allow people that we don't know onto the system. So as long as you take some time, read about it, you can control who they're playing with.
thank you. That's
Thank you,
awesome.
Ray. Our next question comes from Gabriel. Gabriel says, I have a 4-year-old and in UPK in Jackson Heights. I know that they use zone learning, and I'm curious how to replicate that at home. So this is around 4-year-old UPK and zone learning. How do you create that setup? Or
Is zone learning like where they go to different tables and there's different activities?
Yeah.
I mean, I think to some extent that's sort of replicated in our homes anyway, because you know, we have toys that are in different places. One thing I've seen people do is have like baskets that their kids are allowed to take out by themselves. So like whatever, so like some toys you may feel like have a ton of educational value, like Legos and Play-Doh and anything that involves like dressing up and acting things out. So just giving your kids a lot of agency to decide what they're going to do when. Like that's what zone learning is supposed to give kids, is the opportunity to make choices and control what they're doing. And like some of it I think is about negotiating those choices too. So like, because if you're in a classroom and everyone wants to play in the play kitchen, that is not really achievable. And so I think a lot of what teachers are trying to do is teach kids to negotiate and to accept their second choice. That's not something you can really replicate at home. It's a very social experience. But in terms of giving them that sense of agency, I think you can. And also with a 4-year-old, like so much of what they're just learning through play. So just giving them the opportunity to play and to play with toys that are very open-ended, like construction toys, dollhouse toys, things like that. That's mostly what preschools are trying to do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then our next question is from Josh. He has 2 questions, and one he recognizes you might not be able to answer, but just any guidance you could provide. He says, what's going on with school? They say they're going to have an amazing new website portal tomorrow and everything's supposed to be there. From the 3rd grade teacher, I get that there'll be one Zoom at 9 and another at 12, both for 30 minutes. I'm in the same boat, Josh. I don't know what we're doing tomorrow. But the rest of the time, there's a checklist. For the 8th grader I have a sense that the teachers are communication more directly with my child, but it still feels like a black box. I don't know if you have any guidance on that, because it is very specific to the DOE, but any thoughts?
I think nobody knows. Like, I wish I had some thoughts. Like, definitely ask your 8th grader what they know and what they can share with you. But like I was telling Jessica before, I think like you just have to tell them that what's going to happen tomorrow is they'll talk to their teacher and their teacher will give them instructions, which they're familiar with. Like when kids go to school, they often don't know what's going to happen that day. So just if they're going to have morning meeting, like they usually have morning meeting, and get direction, then I think that's still going to feel like a normal school day to them.
And then Josh also had one more question for Aurora. Aurora, can you talk about toggling between work for 2 kids of very different ages from the perspective of a parent? Do you have any strategies for organizing your day as like both the parent educator and someone has to juggle probably a more 9 to 5?
Sure. So I don't have to juggle a 9 to 5. So that is something about my work that's a little unique. I'm a photographer and I work in a studio. So for me, I educate as well. And so a lot of my stuff is very flexible. So that's something that's good for me. A lot of what people I know who do work more 9 to 5 and also homeschool is they have very different hours that they're working, and or not that they're working, but that they're teaching. So their kids might start school much earlier, and they might end school or end their work and then do school in the evenings, and they might just work on bookending. In terms of different ages, I try to teach the same subjects at the same times, but with both of them, but in different levels. So I'll do my 5-minute lesson in math for my 11-year-old who gets it, and then he'll go off and do his math, and then I'll work with my 7-year-old, and then she'll do it kind of more next to me and ask me more questions because she's not quite getting it yet. He's a little, my older is a little bit more capable of doing the lesson on his own, so I can trust him to go and read and continue to learn it, whereas my 7-year-old's just kind of getting there right now. So I do a lot of that. We come together for a lot of things. So one advantage to kind of what we're doing is we can do history all together. And so we sit down and do that all together. So anytime when you can do something together, that's really, really helpful. But I think also what Leontine was saying, no one who's homeschooled for a while is teaching for 7 hours. We're probably doing about 3 to 4 hours. And I think that helps too with the bookending. You can do maybe an hour and a half in the morning and an hour and a half in the evening, or something like that. And again, you're going to have to it's so important in the next few weeks to talk to employers and just see what the actual expectations are, because everybody's going to have to be flexible to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just a reminder for folks on the webinar, if you have a question, click either chat or raise your hand in the participant screen. So either chat, you could type it in, and I'm getting them through my phone, and then, or you could raise your hand. Aurora, I do have a second question for you. I know you have 2 children. Are there times in which you actually leverage an older child to help with educating the younger child, or how do you sort of manage the 2 children of different ages and perhaps making it an easier process in the family?
I think really making it as much together education as you can. So as I said, we read together, and mine aren't so far apart in age that we can't read the same book. I can read sort of higher level stuff than my 7-year-old, and she'll still get something out of it. I think that as much as you can do that, and that's going to be hard, depending on what the DOE is requiring your kids to do. But yeah, as I said, just generally having remembering that your lesson, the actual time that you're actually going to have to teach them is going to be relatively minimal, especially if you're doing more online stuff where the teachers are teaching them. That's going to make it a little easier for people who have multiple kids. If you have kids who are younger than school age, then you're probably going to end up having a little bit more attention for them, and you're going to have to let your older kids kind of take independence. But I think that's a really great thing too, right? To give them as much independence in their learning as possible. So I'm doing that with my son now, whose co-op now is online, and they're doing a lot more of that, where I'm kind of saying, okay, you have chemistry and you get to go do chemistry and tell me what work you have for homework, and if you need help, we'll do it, but mostly it's on you. And he's kind of taken it and run with it, and he's 11. And my 7-year-old would like to do that, but she just isn't quite there yet. Mm-hmm. So I think somewhere in between 7 and 11, you'll get to see a lot more independence.
In terms of letting an older kid help out with a younger kid, do you ever have your older child read to Jenny, or?
Oh yeah, so you can do that too. Yeah. So my older Daniel will read. In fact, for the past few days, he's been wanting to read to her about video games, which is actually really great for both of them, because it is a world in which we live today, and he's teaching her, so he's feeling really great about that because he gets to teach her something, and she loves it because her older brother's paying attention to her. And I think that works really well. And so if you can get 2 kids interested in something together, another place where I can get them working together a lot is if you have any cardboard boxes, you're ordering from Amazon, you have all those cardboard boxes, say, make an arcade, and they will make an arcade, and it will be amazing.
I know. I've actually started keeping boxes as they're doing it.
It's a lifesaver, I tell you. I have so many boxes in my garage for when we get bored, and I can be like, here are the boxes, have fun.
Like when Lynn Lyon talks about giving kids meaningful work to help them manage their anxiety, that's an example of something. Like if you frame it as that, as like you are helping your family or helping your sibling, like we really need you to step up. Like I think that can actually be helpful for the older kids too.
I love that. Gabriel has another question. For very young children, I have found it difficult to keep them on task for more than 15, 20 minutes, which is shorter than my average meeting, right? Juggling the work meetings, perhaps. Any ideas on how to elongate my own window for time on task?
No, that's developmentally normal, and just let them watch TV while you're having a meeting.
That's when you get okay with screen time.
Yeah.
You know, like another thing about screen time is we were talking about like screen time can be really meaningful. So you can have things like something my kids have really loved and that they've learned an amazing amount from is Octonauts, which seems really silly, but both of my kids watched it when they were age appropriate watching it, and both of them know ridiculous things about marine biology that they've told me about that we've actually done research about. So, you know, like sitting and putting Octonauts on for your younger kids and letting them sit in front of it might surprise you. They might tell you all these things you didn't know about the sea that suddenly you'll know, and it'll be really interesting. And you'll look it up on the computer and say, oh, wow, I had no idea that there were barnacles, which is what my child told me.
For older kids, the BBC documentaries are riveting. Like there's a documentary from the BBC on almost every subject, and they do a really good job of making them interesting. Like we watched one about plants that was so interesting. Like I never knew plants could be so interesting. It was 3 hours of plants. We were riveted the whole time, and like it really stuck with her. So that's something else if you're looking for screen time recommendations, I would recommend.
Great. We have just about 4 minutes, so we'll take one last question from Donnie. Thank you, Donnie. I have 2 children, ages 8 and 2. What activities can they do together? I'm thinking cooking. And she also added, I can appreciate this, my 2-year-old will pee in a chair if I don't pay enough attention to him. So how can you keep them active when, you know, again, when it's 8-year-old, 2-year-old, so they have, you know, 6 years difference, and what kind of activities might be fun for both of them when they're developmentally very different?
That's obviously a question for Aurora.
Cooking. I mean, you have it. Like cooking is a great thing to do with them. And if you have the time and energy and you don't mind the incredible mess that comes from having a 2-year-old in the kitchen, I definitely recommend that. That's a great thing for them to do together. Your 8-year-old can also read to your 2-year-old. That is fantastic. It's great for your 8-year-old because he or she, mine is she, is learning, you know, how to read out loud, and they're learning reading skills, and your 2-year-old will be so happy that your 8-year-old is playing with her.
Yeah, great.
And also remember, in a lot of societies, that is an 8-year-old taking care of a 2-year-old is totally normal. Like it's not bad or weird to just say 8-year-old, you need to take care of, like, but Aurora's 7 years younger than me and is my sister, which I hadn't mentioned. And then we have a much younger brother also. So we spent a lot of time like taking care of siblings when we were younger, and it's fine.
And I know I said a last question. This is more of a recommendation, so I wanted to share from Josh. Thank you, Josh. Our kids love audiobooks as an alternative to screen time, and they can be absorbed for hours listening to a novel. Thank you, Josh. That is an awesome idea. Appreciate that. Well, we're actually just perfectly on time. Leontine or Aurora, do you want to share any closing remarks or comments, or a way to sort of ease our anxieties for tomorrow and the weeks ahead?
Well, just remember, this is a terrible time. It's a catastrophe. It's like living through a war. So take it easy on yourself. Don't expect yourself to perform at the level you would perform in your normal life. Like that would be a crazy expectation. Just take it easy and try to get through every day and do your best, and then feel good about yourself at night because you got through a day and everything's.
And I think too, like just being here is like in this space, doing all of this, having all of this disruption is a learning experience. So this in and of itself is something kids are learning about. So us being as calm, and as Leontine said, kind of as calm and as aware and thinking about like our response as possible is going to be an educational experience for your kids as well. So just, you know, they're learning something every day, no matter what you do, and just don't worry too much right now how much they're learning in terms of 1 + 1 and what a noun is.
Yeah. I gotta say the one silver lining for me is that I actually feel like I'm spending more time with my child. And, you know, as a candidate, I kind of assumed I wouldn't be home very much. And this has almost been a slight blessing in that way that we're home together, although certainly feeling the stress of that juggle that everyone's lifting up. So thank you both so much for your expertise, your real life tips. And again, we'll have this recording available probably tomorrow. So thank you everyone for joining. We will continue to have different topics. I believe we're set for Wednesday to talk about mental health in this moment, how to take care of yourself and take care of your family, and make sure that we're all staying mentally healthy during these really tough moments. So we hope you can join us then. And again, we're also doing mutual aid calls in this moment. We're calling our neighbors, checking in, delivering supplies, whatever they need. So if you are available and you want to sign up for a shift, it's www.votejgr.com/phonebank, and there's shifts available there. So if you have some time and you want to check in on some neighbors, it'd be a great use of your time. We'd really appreciate it. So thank you, Leontine. Thank you, Aurora. Thank you to my team that set this all up. And please take care of yourself. Social distance, wash your hands, don't touch your face, which is hard for me. And again, look out for one another. So thank you all.
Thank you.